If you like pina colada, getting caught. Hey, cut that off. We can't even sing that right now. This ain't even my best lotta. Because the coconut milk is off. I can't even do nothing. The coconut milk is off. I'll get you a real one when we get back to the States if I got a few dollars. Maybe at the airport. Boy, my prediction was all the way off. But I said some good stuff in that conversation, though. I'll touch on that later. A whole lot of stuff took place this episode, and I'm just going to jump right into it. This is Amor Fati. So we start off with Brother Monk dropping bars. And in his message, he was talking about how sometimes we dwell in anxiety. And part of that is due to the fact that we want to know what's coming our way. We have all these questions about life, and our way to answer those questions is through taking the reins of our lives and controlling it, trying to steer it in the way that we want it to go. However, those are just temporary fixes. He said that only leads to more anxiety and pain. And he pretty much said there's no answers to life's questions, and that we gain patience through realizing that there's no resolution. So we don't have all the answers. Just go with it. So then we pop back over to Bangkok, and Rick is just waking up, and he's waking up to the sound of Frank still partying from the night before. That man is in there stabbing a mannequin, talking about this the chest cavity. And Frank popped in there and was like, "What are you doing?" He was like, "I'm showing my moves, man." And Rick was like, "Well, I gotta bounce. I'm gonna see you later." And Frank came down the hall trying to get him to stay there, and he did this little tumble roll that sent me. I was like, why is he doing this in the hallway? And Frank and the girls were trying to get Rick to stay, but Rick was like, I got a flight to catch. So then we get back to the Lotus, and we in the parking lot, and Gaytuck and Mook strike up a conversation, and he was like, "Did you have a good date last night?" And she was like, "Yeah, it was pretty good." And he was like, "Yeah, it was a great first date. We will always cherish this day." And he went on to tell her, "Hey, when Peleg comes in, I'm going to tell him who did the robbery." And Mook was super excited about it. She was like, "Man, if you solve this crime like Sherlock, man, he gonna be real impressed." So then we get over to the Charlie's Angel Villa, and Jacqueline is coming out. They just woke up, and she sees Kate and said, "Hey, have you seen Lori?" And Kate was like, "Nah." And then Jacqueline was like, "Should we invite her to breakfast?" And Kate was like, "Yeah, I'll go get her." And Jacqueline was like, No, I'll go get her." And when she got to her room, she noticed that Lori was just kind of knocked out. Definitely because of the night she had with Alexi, but she probably had some soul searching that evening too. And Jacqueline invited her to breakfast, but she declined because she was really tired. And then Jacqueline decided to apologize. She was like, "Hey, I'm sorry about Valentine. I didn't know that was going to impact you the way it did." And Laura was like, Jack, not while I'm trying to get these Encrustables out my eyes." And Jacqueline replied, "I really want to be your friend." And Jacqueline replied, "I want to be your friend, but we don't have to talk about it right now. We could talk about it when you're awake." So then we see Lachlan and Piper walking on the beach, and Lachlan was like, "Should I wait till Mama get back on her drugs until I tell her that I'm sticking around over here with you?" And then Piper stopped walking, and he was like, "What?" And she was like, "Listen, I don't want to be responsible for messing up your life. Let me mess up my own life. You go about your business." And this is one of those things that I think people got to get over. You may have influence on a person. However, the choice is always theirs to make. We got to let people live and die with their choices. And he made that choice on his own. He didn't say, "Do you think I should come over here with you? I'm doing this because Piper's doing it." He simply said, "I enjoy it and I would like to do it." So we're back at the Ratliff Villa, and Saxon is there reading a book. And apparently he doesn't want anybody to know that he's reading, because when he saw that Piper and Lachlan were showing up, he hid the book behind a pillow on the couch. And he said, "They're here." And then Victoria comes out all lively because she wants to know all about this. She said, "How was it?" And Piper was like, girl, I'm going to talk to you about it later. I don't want to talk about it right now." And then when she walks out the room, she was like, "Lachlan, I need the tea." And Lachlan was like, "Man, I don't even effing know." And I'm like, "Ooh, not you cussing at your mama like you crazy." See, that conversation that he had with Piper on the beach impacted him enough to try to transfer that energy onto his mama. And it's not going to impact Victoria like that because she about to get them details at breakfast. And speaking of breakfast, Belinda and Zion are over there having theirs. And Porn Chai walks up to the table. He was like, "Hey, Belinda." And she was like, "Hey, what's up, Porn Chai? What you doing?" He said, "Man, I just came over here to say what's up. I saw you." And that hug they gave each other, I could just tell it smells good. I mean, I'm smelling shea butter, cocoa butter, any of the butters that's necessary, as well as the essence of love. And you could tell that they like each other because Belinda actually invited him to sit down with them. And then he replied in that Ty Billy D voice of his. He said, "I just saw you over here and I wanted to say hello." And she was like, "Hello back." And then he was like, "Hello." And I was like, "Oh, y'all so cute. Why y'all flirting in front of her son like this?" And when he left, Zion was like, "Wow, you really like this man." and he really like you too. And Belinda was like, well, he trying to go into business with me. And he was like, with that spy you talking about? And she's like, yeah. She was like, but where would we even do it? He was like, anywhere you want to. She was like, well, we both poor, so I don't know how we gonna do anything about that. And he said, Mama, do I really need to spell it out for you? And Belinda was like, hey, bro, we not even talking about Greg like that. I told you I wasn't gonna do that. And on top of that, 100K ain't even enough to do anything. And Zion was like, well, you did say you were gonna think about it. I mean, you can negotiate for more money. He said, let's at least see how much we can get out of this. And then he said, you're going to need a real negotiator anyway. And then he put on his glasses and leaned back in his chair. But all I could think about was that scene from Bad Boys.
My shit always works sometimes.
And then we get over to the breakfast table with Tim, Victoria, and Piper. Now, they were quiet for a second, but then Victoria was kind of eyeballing Tim like, say something. And Tim was like, how was it, Piper? Did you like the place? And she was like, yeah, it's pretty cool. And he was like, it's cool that you've proven yourself that you can live a much simpler life. And Victoria did not like his response. And then Piper responded after him, was like, yeah. And Tim was like, what's wrong? And she said, it's the food. I'm going to be honest, it was vegetarian, but you could tell it wasn't organic. And then they didn't have a lick of Lawry's in the room. So I'm trying to figure out, ain't we in Thailand? I know y'all got some spices over here, but none of that has touched my plate. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to eat that all year. And then she got to the room and was like, man, it was a shoebox. And it was a dirty mattress with stains on it and no AC. My gosh. And let me tell you, Victoria was eating it up. I told y'all she was going to be pleased. And she was holding her chest. I felt like she was going to meet Elizabeth. I was like, girl, why are you so excited right now? She was having all kinds of palpitations over there. And Piper continued saying, man, I don't want to be seen as this princess that just wants her things how she wants them, but I want it that way. And I know I'm not supposed to value these things, but I do. And Victoria just kept updating her face like software. I was like, girl, you're excited because your daughter is acting like you expected her to act. Meanwhile, Piper's over there crying her eyes out, talking about people have so little while we have so much. And she's like, I just feel bad. And Victoria's like, you shouldn't feel bad. And honestly, I agree with that. You shouldn't feel bad for having nice things or wanting nice things. My thing is, I'm not trying to hoard everything. I feel bad myself, and I'm not even rich. But like sometimes I'm driving here in Atlanta, and anybody that's familiar with the area, if you get off on Moreland, it's always homeless people right there. I don't give stuff to people every time I see them. But, I feel bad too sometimes. And then Victoria said, bring it in for a hug, girl. It's okay. And while she was hugging her, that look that she gave Tim, that smile with the thumbs up, sent me. But mentally, that is sending Tim into a frenzy because he's thinking, oh my gosh, none of y'all can live without stuff? How am I supposed to handle this pressure? Now, at the breakfast table, there are two missing Ratliffs. That's Lachlan and Saxon. They're back at the villa, and at least Saxon is looking at Lachlan a little bit more and actually responding to him a little bit more. Because the day after the full moon festival, Saxon wasn't saying anything, could barely even look at his brother. But it was good that he had time to mull it over while Piper and Lachlan were over at the monastery. But Lachlan is trying to find a way to get back in his good graces. He was like, if you're making one of those bad tasting shakes, I'm down to drink one. And Saxon replied, oh, I already had one, but the fixings is over there if you want to make one yourself. And then he turned around and said, hey, nobody's going to make you a man. You got to do it yourself. And then he was like, I'm going to catch you later. I'm about to go to the beach. And Lachlan was like, can I come with? And he was like, nah, I'm about to go to the beach just to read a little bit. So he went and grabbed his book from behind the pillow and was getting ready to go. And Lachlan was just like, are you mad at me? And Saxon could barely get his words out. He was kind of stumbling over words for a second, but then he gathered himself. He was like, listen, Lachlan, it is okay for you to worship me, i.e., you can look up to me as your big brother. But then he said, don't worship me, though. And then he kind of looked down like he was looking toward his genitalia. And that is where Lachlan decided to say, look, man, about that situation on the boat. Look, you only think about getting off. And I thought you looked a little lonely, and I decided to give you a little mercy meat massage because I'm a people pleaser in a family full of narcissists. And Saxon cut that man off and said, hey, leave that conversation over there on the boat. I don't want no parts of it. I don't want to hear about it ever again. And I totally agree with that because it was kind of disturbing and disgusting at the same time. And listen, I love my brothers down, but I don't want to love my brothers down. I'm not trying to strike vipers with either one of them. So I totally understand where Saxon is coming from. Now, something that I find interesting in this situation is that both siblings throughout this entire series have been trying to influence Lachlan to be a certain way. And then you get to this finale and you see that both of them are trying to wipe their hands of their brother. They don't want to be the reason that he's been influenced to do whatever he's doing. And what I think happened here is that Piper is being more proactive, where she can say that he doesn't make a bad decision because of her. And on the other hand, I believe that Saxon is reacting to what happened to him and thinking about the fact that what I taught my brother might have come back to bite me in the butt. So next we flash over to a scene where we see Lori walking out of her room and she's grabbing some clothes or whatnot, and she sees Kate and Jacqueline in the pool, and they look like they buddy. They taking selfies, they taking pics out there in a beautiful scenery. And I think she gives a little slight smile at first, but then when you see a close-up of her face, it's more of an expression of sadness. So then we get to the scene where Gay Tuck is leaving a voicemail for Pelek. And he was like, hey man, I know you off today, but when you get a chance, call me back. I got some information to give you. And right as he got off the phone, Valentin popped up out of nowhere and was like, hey friend, how was the fight? I was looking for you, but you dipped. And Gay Tuck was like, yeah, I was on a date. And you looked a little preoccupied because there was 2 guys there with you. Are those your friends? And Valentin was like, oh, those are just some guys I know from the gym. And Gay Tuck was like, what are their names? And Valentin was like, what you need to know that for? And Gay Tuck was like, I think I've seen them somewhere before. And Valentin was like, man, I can't even help you, big dog. I don't have the number. And you could tell that Gay Tuck is reading through the lie real quick. So then we get down to the beach and you see Chelsea and Chloe sitting down there by themselves. And all of a sudden, Saxon shows up and he throws the book down a little bit. And Chelsea was like, you brought back my book. And Saxon replied, I'm a voracious reader like Cat Williams. I'm almost done with the book. And she was like, well, give me some feedback on it. What did you think? And he said, it was pretty cool. I thought it was interesting about the intercourse aspect of the book. And she was like, well, I gave you some other books. They're not all about that. Now they got into a deeper conversation about one of the books she gave him. And whatever conversation she was having was deaded as soon as she saw her man walk up on that beach. She took off. Now this hurt Saxon's feelings, I think, because Saxon really likes her in a different way. And I think he felt like just trying to lean into what she likes and trying to do that kind of stuff actually would make her like him more. But that's not how that works. You can't do some quick fixes and expect somebody to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna leave everything else I have and I'm gonna start dating you. This kind of borders on him being manipulative. Because if we're being honest, you're just supposed to try to be a better person because you want to be a better person, not because you're trying to get into somebody's pants. But you could see it in his eyes that he wanted that so bad. Then Chelsea ran and jumped into that man's arms and kissed him all up and down and then said, how did it go? And he's like, well, I ain't killed nobody. And she said, well, that's good. That's a start. And he said, I said what I needed to say. I got that monkey off my back. And then they walked off hand in hand. And part of me is like, why y'all walking off into the sunset like you don't have somebody chasing you, like they don't know who you are or where you are? You should have been all packed and ready to go. But anyway, and see, Saxon could have seasoned Piper's food the whole year because that brother was salty. And I'm trying to figure out what you expected because she already said he was her soulmate. Seeing that was a dead end, he set his sights over to Chloe and was like, hey, sorry I couldn't help you out with Gary's request. Remember I said Chloe is the woman version of Saxon. So of course she replied, it's all good. I can easily replace you. And she knew that was going to hurt his feelings. See, and there's a lesson here because what happens is when somebody is a user of people and they realize they can't use you, you're pretty much dead to them. So then we get back to the Lotus, and now that Piper is back in the fold, Victoria got her in the jewelry section of the store talking about, hey girl, if you like it, go ahead and get it. And Tim is just looking at them in the store like, oh my gosh, she is just running my pockets right now. So he decided to go back to the villa. And Lachlan is in there just reading a book. And he says, hey Lachlan, do you think you can live without any money? Like I'm talking about no money, no house, nothing. And Lachlan was like, yeah, I think I can. And I think that gave Tim a bit of relief. He was like, oh my gosh, you can? But then he was like, man, it's the last day. Go on out here and enjoy yourself. And I feel like Tim should have taken his own advice because he sat there and let his mind start wandering. And then he started having visions of that poisonous fruit that Pam told Saxon not to eat in episode 1. And so this takes us on a little journey between people being in a pensive mode. So you had Tim at the villa. You had Belinda riding on her way to Gary Gregg's house, so she's got to get her mind right. And then you get to Gaytuck, and he's sitting there just really thinking about what he's going to have to say to Pelek. Then Valentin walks up on him, and I know he put 2 and 2 together because he was like, I know you know. And if you tell anybody, I'm dead. Like, you're actually killing me. I can't go back to my country because if I go back to my country, I'm dead. Even my friends will be dead if they have to go back. And they don't have any way to make money here. So please don't say anything. And I'm thinking, what in the thief's theme is this? Because what are you telling me, Valentin? I got hit upside the head with a gun and I was probably concussed and I ain't get to concuss nobody else. So I'm likely pissed, but You got to think about the disposition of Gaeta, because you know he's all about not harming other people, even though they actually harmed him. Now, if there are any Buddhists watching this commentary, could you please get in the comments and let me know if Buddhists actually believe in accountability in this life, or do you only receive punishment in like the next life, in reincarnation? So they ended up getting interrupted by Fabian, and Fabian was talking to Valentin. He was like, hey, the Hollanders are coming in tomorrow and they want to take a picture with Jacqueline. Could you go check with her to make sure that's all good? And by the time Valentin looked back over there, Gaetuck was already gone. So then we back at the Rattler Villa, and now Tim is over here at the tree plucking down fruit. And then Pam startles him because she's coming back with the phones. She was like, I'm just going to put these on the table in here, because Saxon asked for his back, which is interesting because Saxon couldn't get his back when he asked for it, but she gave Tim his back when he asked for it. And Tim was like, don't do that. We're good on the phones right now. We don't need them right now. And she was like, are you enjoying the time without your phone? She said, what I could do is put this on the boat that's leaving the hotel so you can get it on the way home. And he was like, yeah, do that. And then he started asking about the fruit. He was like, what did you say about this fruit when we first came here? She said, oh, that's the fruit you're not supposed to eat unless you're trying to take yourself out. But she kind of gave him the roadmap to do it if he was trying, because she was like, oh yeah, the people grind up the seeds so they can be on the next thing smoking to the upper room. And she was like, so don't eat it. So she concluded her lecture and then left. And of course he took notes. So he proceeded to open up as many fruits as possible and took all the little seeds out. So then we get over to Gary Gregg's house, and I should have been able to tell by the way that Zion was walking in there that man was there for business. I mean, he had the shades on, but he walked in like one of those agents from Ballers. And then the guy that walked him in was like, hey, can I get y'all anything? And Belinda was too nervous to get anything. But Zion was like, hey, give us 2 whiskeys on the rocks, please. And she gawked over at that man like, who is this stranger that I raised? And he was like, we gonna need it. Trust me. And I was like, I know that's right, Zion. You better lead mama to that money. And lead he did, because that man hit her with her own words. And I love when we could turn it on the parents. He said, remember when you told me I got to stay prepared so I don't miss my moment? He was like, this one could be yours. Don't miss out on your moment. And then Belinda called me off guard because she was like, he killed the bitch. And I was like, well, damn, Belinda, you ain't have to say it like that. And he said, this could be that one good thing that comes from this tragedy. And honestly, she doesn't have that many options. Either you take the money or you call the authorities and take your chance with the legal system. But somebody with that kind of bread, they likely not gonna go to prison. So when he gets out of that little court case you tried to set him up with, you might as well go ahead and make your arrangements, because you know who he's coming for. And so they get in there and start talking to Gary. And Gary is like, I thought I was going to be talking to you by myself. And Zion was like, oh, let me introduce myself. I am Zion. I'm her only son. We are a team, and you don't have to worry about it. I'm cone of silence. He gave him a whole rundown, too. He was like, I'm at U of H. I'm working on my MBA. He said, I'm a businessman. I don't care what you did. I don't care what you about to do. He was like, all I care about is the bottom line. You feel me? And he was definitely in business mode, because this man said, my mom caught me up to speed on your initial offer, and unfortunately, that will be a pass. And Gary was like, oh, is that right? And he was like, well, it's just she's caught up in the ethics of it all. And, thinking about all the guilt that she would feel. And she would like to focus on opening her business because that's her dream. And Gary was like, well, that's what the money was for. And Zion came back, was like, frankly, it's not enough, because she can't be business broke. And then he started trying to wax poetic. He was like, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? And I was like, hey, son, wrap that part up. We don't have time for this little soliloquy you putting on. And Belinda looked at that man like, what are you even talking about right now? Get to the point. And Zion was like, the point is, the number is not enough for my mom to have to take on that risk dealing with you, as well as to have her dream. And he was like, you already have your dream here. Why shouldn't she have hers? And he was like, is there enough money here to go around to make everybody happy? I think so. And Gary was like, so what's the number? And Zion was like, everything out the dough, soup to nuts. We looking at a good number, about 5 million. And when I tell you, he gagged Belinda, because she was over here coughing, choking up. She had to take a sip of that whiskey. She was not expecting him to utter such a number. And Gary was like, that's not happening. And Zion was like, well, I get that that's a lofty number. However, we did a little research on the internet, and your ex-wife, former wife, RIP to the girl she used to be, we found out that she was worth $500 million. And Gary was like, well, you shouldn't believe everything you read. And he said, yeah, I get that, but I found some very public records that corroborated that number. And he was like, all we asking for is 1% of what you have. It's not like you're going to miss it. What, you gonna spend it all in Thailand? He even got a little petty. He was like, man, you got 1 foot in the grave. How long are you gonna be here? He was like, is 1% not worth your piece? And then you could kind of see Belinda's wheels turning in her head. And she popped up and said, you know what? I can't do this. He's not gonna give us the money, and this whole thing is a waste of time. She said, let's go. And Zion was like, Ma, could you leave the businessmen alone to chat privately? And she was like, no, Zion, I mean it. Let's go. And she stormed off while he chased after her, leaving Gary like, what just happened? So when Zion finally caught up to Belinda, he said, Ma, what's up? And she was like, go back up in there. Tell that man that your mom takes things very personally and she does not trust him. And she said if he doesn't come through with the money, she not about to play no games with you. At least make him feel that way. And she's trying to flip that power dynamic because she said at the moment, he's trying to make us afraid of him, but we need to make him afraid of us. You see, mama got tricks up her sleeve too. And she said, now go over there and close that deal like I taught you. Now this is how you improv a situation, Rick and Frank. The mom and son duo came in tough. And that's the move you make when you wanna be a baller. Shot caller, 20-inch blades on an Impala. So then we get over to what I call like a mini Buddha temple or station, if you will. And Gaytuck is over there doing his incense and praying about his next move. And then right after that, we go into a scene where it looks like Tim is having a little private Easter egg hunt so he can get all the poisonous fruit seeds to grind up. So then we get back to the guardhouse and Mook comes in and says, Gaytuck, you know, your girl just clocked out. She was really excited to see him too. And he was like looking real glum. And she was like, what's wrong? He said, girl, I think I'm gonna have to quit this job. And she's like, for what? And he was like, I don't think I'm really cut out to be a guard. And she's like, why do you say that? And he was like, you know, I thought about it. And if I were the Buddha, what would I do? I don't really want to hurt anybody. And when I tell you, she took in one of the deepest breaths. She said, I got to measure my words carefully because she was like, I'm tired of this man. She was like, fam, you've been here for years. And you're going to tell me that you're going to quit this job and go start from the bottom elsewhere? She was like, you got to be practical and stop overthinking things. And he was like, I could find another job. I'm a hard worker. And she looked at him like, okay. And she was like, I thought you were a confident man that wanted to go places. And he was like, well, I am confident when I feel good about myself. And I know she's probably like, dog, I'm tired of talking about feelings all the time with him. And I appreciate that he's in touch with his feelings. I just don't think she's that into that. And then he tried to change the subject talking about, you want to go to dinner tonight? And she was like, nah, you know, my mama back hurt. I probably got to stay around the crib a little bit. And he was like, well, what about tomorrow? And she hit him with that, I'll think about it, which that sounds like no coming from Mook. So it's time for the Ratliff crew to head out to dinner, and Tim finally takes the last lorazepam. I was like, bro, how many did you have? Because he was taking 2 at a time, but he emptied that bottle. I feel like he took a 30-day supply in a week. And after the host seated them at their table, Tim asked her, hey, since it's our last night here, we want to make some cocktails in the room. Could you bring some pina colada mix up there? We already got the blender. And the look on Saxon's face is like, man, that don't even sound like nothing you drink, bruh. And Victoria's also surprised, but she was like happy surprised, like, oh my gosh, pina coladas. What is going on? She probably thinking he's being spontaneous. But no, sis, he trying to kill your ass and make it sound sexy. And then over at the Charlie's Angels table, Kate and Jacqueline are sitting at the table, and then Lori shows up looking nice. And Jacqueline's like, girl, I thought you was gonna miss the last dinner. To which Lori replied, girl, I just had a late night. I had to get myself together. And Kate was like, how was it? What did you do? And she was like, well, you know, I went to the fight, and then I went back to Alexi's apartment. And then Jacqueline was like, okay, Alexi. And then they got interrupted by Valentin asking if Jim and Shatala could take a picture with Jacqueline tomorrow. And I'm glad that's all she got to say about Alexi, because that man hit her with the, after you get the nookie, then you gotta cash at me. Hundreds. But in his case, it was thousands. And I'm like, it couldn't have been that good. And I'm sure that Alexi's girlfriend slapped a little common sense back into Lori's head last night. Because you saw her face when she was walking down that tunnel like, girl, what kind of decision did you just make? Your friends were right about you. They might have been wrong about a number of things, but they were right about this. And so then we get over to Belinda's table, and she's like, I'm too nervous to eat. And she was like, Zion, I told you to close the deal. He should have already had the money over here. She's waiting to see if that direct deposit done hit. And Zion was like, he said he'd think about it. Already gave me your bank information, so now all we got to do is wait. He can deposit it tonight. So then we get over to Rick and Chelsea's table, and Chelsea is like, you're free. Like, it's a new day for you. And he said, I told you didn't have nothing to worry about. And she said, well, of course I'm going to worry because I love you. Even though I don't recall him saying I love you back, whether it's verbal or the way he treated her the entire trip. But she was like, you know, I wasn't too worried about you though, because amor fati. And she was like, do you know what that means? He was like, I do not. And she said, essentially, you're accepting your fate, whether good or bad. And she said, at this point, we're linked. So if anything happens to you, it happens to me. And she followed it up with, I think we're going to be together for a long time. And he was like, that's the plan. And she paused for a second and looked at him. She was like, oh, word? And he was like, yeah. And even though they were sitting at a table full of food, she leaned back in that seat as though she had had the biggest meal. If she had a belt on, she would unlock that junk and just rub her stomach because her appetite had been satiated by his words. And then we head back over to that table with Jacqueline, Lori, and Kate. And it feels like they're going around the table saying what they're thankful for during Thanksgiving. And Kate started it out and she was like, I'm really glad we did this. She said, thanks, Jacqueline, for taking care of everything. And then she went into this part of the conversation where she brought up something her pastor said, where he discusses, you know, there's a time in life you've done a lot to tend to your soil, You've weeded, you've watered, you've done what you needed to do. And he said, you'll look around one day and your garden will be in bloom. And she said, I look around at this table right now and I think that's where we are. All of our flowers are in bloom. And I was like, girl, that was beautiful. Come on, Pastor. And then Jacqueline chimed in after that and said, I've been on cloud nine this entire week. She said, I can meditate or do yoga or whatever, but what really made this week for me is having friends, my real friends here with me. She said, it could be a lonely world. People judge you for your superficial defects, and y'all judge me for my profound ones, but I'm really thankful that y'all came. And then all of a sudden, I'm looking at Lori. I was like, what is she going to say? How's she going to respond? Is she about to go off on somebody? She did not. She actually did one better. She led with honesty. She said, if we being honest, I've been sad all week. And Kate was like, what, girl? And she said, as you get older, you have to kind of justify the decisions that you've made throughout your life. And as I look at y'all, it's clear that I made some decisions that I probably shouldn't have. Then she looked at Kate and said, I don't have a belief system. She said, well, I've had a lot of them. At first it was my job, and I lost faith in that a long time ago. And then I tried love, and that was an even more terrible religion. And even becoming a mom, that hasn't worked for me. And then she said, I had this epiphany today. I don't really need religion or God to give my life meaning. Time will. And she was like, we started this life together. And even though we're living it in different areas, she said, we are still together. And she said, when I'm with y'all, even if we're talking about the most inane stuff, I still feel like there's some meaning to it. I get meaning when I'm with y'all. And then she turned to Jacqueline and said, I'm glad you have a beautiful face. And then she turned to Kate and said, I'm glad you have a beautiful life. And I'm just happy to be at the table. And then they went around the table and said, I love you. And I watched this scene at least thrice because it was so good. And if I'm being honest, I hadn't seen them as friends this whole season until this episode. So it seems that they just needed a little bit of conflict to move them in the right direction. And I like the way she talked about religion not being so much of an organized religion, but more so of a thing that you have this as your God. One of the most misquoted Bible verses is, for the love of money is the root of all evil. People always overlook the word love, because your love of money, or whatever fill in the blank, will be your God. Money only has the value we give it, but your love for it will make you do anything to have it. And Lori was trying to find her life through these things or situations. And remember what the monk said. He said, we try to force ourselves to have certain interactions because we're trying to find the answer to life. And we're trying to build this kind of meaning, but you got to wait on some things to come to you in the way they're supposed to come to you. And that's all I'm going to say on that. I just love seeing the crew get back together like that. Speaking of back together, the Ratliffs are back at their villa, and Tim is about to make those pina coladas. And he told Lachlan he couldn't have any because he was under 21. But really it was to protect him because he was the only one that said he could live without all those things. And my thing about this is, either you do everybody or you do nobody. Because if you take out everybody except for Lachlan, the man gonna be in therapy for the rest of his life. And he's probably gonna need something stronger than a pina colada. So he handed everybody a glass except for Lachlan, told him go get a Coke, and he decided to give closing remarks. And so he started talking. He said, we've had a good life, huh? And he talked about the things that they hadn't been through. And then he got to know trauma. And the camera went straight to Saxon. And Saxon and Lachlan locked eyes. And he was like, my job is to keep that from you, to keep you safe. And then he got real emotional because he knew what was coming. And that's when he said, I love y'all so much. And then Victoria said, I can't wait to get home, but I want to toast to Tyler. And then they raised their glasses for the cheers or whatever. And then Saxon was suspicious because he was like, pina colada. And then he smelled it. He said, man, it smells weird. And Tim was like, no, it doesn't. And he took him a little gulp of the drink. And I was like, man, you really trying to convince them that they want to drink this? And then everybody tried to sip it a little bit. And you could tell that Piper and Saxon didn't want it at all. Victoria tried a little bit harder, and that's probably because she misses her lorazepam. And as Tim was looking around, he was watching other people trying to drink, and then I guess he was overcome with guilt because all of a sudden he just knocked the glass out of Saxon's hand. And that caused quite a commotion. So everybody was like, what's going on? And he was like, man, the coconut milk is off. He's like, look, the coconut milk is off. And then Victoria tried to back him up. She was like, the coconut milk is off. And then he grabbed the remaining glasses and poured them down the sink. And then he was like, I'm just going to go to bed. And Victoria was like, boy, if you don't grab one of those bottles of wine and come on over here. But what they neglected to do is pour out all of what was in that blender because they still had residue of the pina colada as well as the poison in there. The zoom in clearly let us know we were going to come back to it. Now, we didn't get there right away because we went over to Belinda's villa and she couldn't sleep. So she got up and went to her computer, started clicking and clacking, got to that account, and her eyes were wide open when she saw that Gary Gregg said, I got 5 on it. I guess his name is permanently Gary now. And it was cool that they used the monkey to scream instead of her because I don't know how I would have responded in that situation. I don't know if I would have passed out or if I would have screamed. And then we get back to the guardhouse and Satala and Jim are pulling up. Fabian's there. Valentin is greeting them. And then the bodyguards, they always trying to mess with Gator. They was like, oh, here goes Superman. How your head doing? And he was like, I'm good. And then they decided to mock him. They was like, oh, you're so great. And started tapping their head and stuff. And I was like, you little heifers. If you don't get away from this man, they just be hating for no reason. And so he's in the guardhouse with Pelek. And Pelek was like, so what was the message about? Is it about the robbery? And then Gator was like, I just don't think I'm right for this job. He was like, I let you down. And then Pelek wouldn't even let him finish. He was just like, man, you're a good worker, fam. He was like, I need you to really think about what you're about to do. And we could talk about that later. And he was like, I'm going to run over here to Popeyes real quick and get some lunch. I'll see you in a little bit. And so back at Belinda's villa, she's showing Zion the money. He's looking at the account like, oh my gosh. And she's like, yeah, it's real. I called the bank. And she said, and Gary called me. And he was like, what did he say? And she said, he just said, I'm giving this to Tanya as much as I'm giving it to you. It's what she would have wanted. And she said, he asked if she was going to keep up her end of the bargain. And Zion was like, so what did you say? And she started laughing so hard. And she said, of course I said I would do it. And all you could hear from Zion when he was jumping up and down was, get money. And then Belinda was like, listen, I got to wrap up a few things, but then we're going to get up out of here today. And he was like, get up out of where? She was like, Thailand. I can't be down the hill when he changes his mind. And he was like, well, he already put the money in the account. She said, well, listen, I don't want to be found. And then he was like, well, what about your man? He was talking about porn child. He said, weren't y'all trying to start a business together? And she was like, son, can I be rich for like 5 minutes? And he was like, yeah, you can. Yeah, we can. And then they rocked each other with joy. And she was like, now go ahead and get ready because I booked you a session for stress management. You're going to need it. And he was like, Ma, I'm too blessed to be stressed. And she said, no, if I'm paying for it, you're going to go on down there to that thing. So you're going to see Miss Amrita. So then back at the Ratliff Villa, you have Lachlan walking around and nobody's in the villa with him because he's yelling and nobody said anything. And then he decides he wants to make himself a protein shake. So my question is, do they have maids at the house because nobody taught this man to rinse out a blender before using it? At first I thought he was going to just try that pina colada mix, but I don't think he was thinking that way because Tim threw out all of it because he said the coconut milk wasn't good. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he thought that was just residue from a protein shake that Saxon made earlier. And since it's the same thing, it doesn't really matter. So he puts all the ingredients in there and he just turns the blender on. So then we get over to breakfast with Rick and Chelsea. And Chelsea's telling a story about some people with some zodiacs that are clashing. And Rick was like, can I pause you real quick? Because the brother's still hungry. I'm going to go over here and grab something real quick. And she's like, ooh, grab me a donut. And he said, I got you. And while he's over there getting their food, guess who shows up behind him? Good old Jim. And he was like, I can't believe my eyes. First of all, you come in my house. You lie to my wife. And then you have the audacity, the gall to be in my hotel right now. Get up out of here. And Rick was like, I'm on the next thing smoking. I don't want nothing to do with you. And just like a man with bruised ego and pride, Jim could not stop himself from saying something. He was like, I knew your mom. I knew she was a drunk and a say, but I didn't know she was a liar too. Talking about your daddy was a good man. You ain't miss out on much. And that's the truth. And I'm going to say it like this. You don't talk about nobody's mama, especially a dead one. And then extra especially when they've been harboring these feelings for decades. People have done worse for less. And then Rick looked like he's about to run up on this man. And Jim looked at him and was like, so what you gonna do? Kill me now? Tuh. That man opened up his jacket, brandishing that firearm, and said, I'd love to see you try. And Jim was so fried from that little exchange that he just walked away quietly and went back to the table, put his hands on his face. And Chelsea was like, what's going on? He's like, he's here. And she was like, who? He said, Jim. And she said, forget about him. You're free now, remember? And he was like, how am I supposed to get over the fact that he did all of this to my life? He took everything from me. And she was like, listen, don't worry about the love that you didn't have. Worry about the love that you do have. I'm literally right here. And he just kept staring the man down. He was seeing red. And then Chelsea got nervous and started kind of tearing up. She was like, please don't do anything stupid. And I hate to report it to you, sis, but stupid was already at the top floor. And then he got up and said, I'm fine. He just needed to go talk to Amrita. Because she did get him right in that previous conversation where she said, you don't have to be tethered to your past. And he got up just in time because they were about to stick security on him. And Chelsea popped up and went after him. And I was glad that Chelsea took her donut with her too. Because girl, same. I would have took my food with me. That donut looked really good. Looked like it had lemon icing on it or something. So then we get to the scene where Lachlan actually drinks that shake and he walks out there by the pool. He finishes it. He gets sick almost immediately. And as he drops the glass, you see Piper walking toward the villa from afar. And then Saxon does the same. And then Victoria says, I'm going to go ahead and let Tim sleep, But let's go to breakfast. Now they see Lachlan sitting over there at one of those seats by the pool, but don't really know what's going on. They were yelling at him to come over there, but nobody went to check on him. So essentially Piper was like, just meet us over there. Now Lachlan could barely move at that moment, but when he did get up, he ran closer to the pool and started vomiting. And then he laid on the ground out there by himself for a while. So then you see Belinda and Zion, they're walking down that path, and she's like, that's where your treatment center is going to be, over there. And then she was like kind of nervous, and Zion was like, Ma, breathe. We did that thing, Ma. We did it. She said, yeah, we did. And then she went on her way, and then Amrita came to pick them up. And as they're walking to the place that they're going to do like their session, they run into Rick. And Rick calls Amrita over there, and he's like, hey, sis, I need you right now. She was like, I got a session right now, though. And he said, no, this is urgent. I really, really need you right now. And she said, I can come get you after my session. Just give me an hour, sit on this bench. I'll come get you. I promise. Now, my thing about this, if somebody comes to me and says something is urgent, I will at least ask what it is. Because if it's life or death, I don't want to be that person who was like, man, I told him to wait an hour. To his credit, he did sit down on the bench for a little while. So then we get back poolside over at the Ratliff Villa, and Lachlan is still struggling to move. And then his blinks start to get slower and slower, like he's about to fade out. And he's seeing his family members flash before his eyes. And then his eyes just kind of close, what seems like for the last time. And then this artistic vision starts to happen in the pool that shows his death, where he's kind of trying to swim to the top, but he can't get to the top. And there's 4 shadowy figures looking down at him, and these are monks. And no matter how hard he's swimming, he can't get to the top. And eventually he just drowns. And so you see him die in the water, but then you also see him kind of like stop moving at the top of the pool as well. And I was like, oh my gosh, not him dying by the pool alone. So Tim wakes up and he walks out kind of groggy, and he's in the kitchen area, and he notices that somebody used the blender. And he's like, oh my gosh, who was around? Who did this? And from the kitchen, he could see Lachlan laying on the ground by the pool. So he walks out of the villa to investigate while Lachlan is laying on the ground like that, and Lachlan isn't responding. So then he rushes over to him and picks him up and say, hey, wake up. He's trying to wake him up, and he's screaming for help. And I was like, oh, he'll never forgive himself for this one. So then we get down on the wellness center path, very close to where Rick is sitting on that bench. And it just so happened that Fabian, Jim, and Shatala were meeting Jacqueline, Lori, and Kate in that spot to take the picture. Well, Rick looked over and saw them, and he was feeling some kind of way, but he didn't get up off the bench. He just kind of looked. And one of the things he was looking at was their proximity to the security. The guys were a little spread out, and I was like, you better tighten up. You already had elder abuse part 1. You don't want a part 2. So then we bounce over to a scene where Belinda is walking up to Porn Chai, and they exchange niceties per usual. And she says, Porn Chai, you know, I've loved getting to know you this whole time, but unfortunately my circumstances have changed, and I have to leave Thailand tomorrow. And he was like, well, what about the business that you and I were going to run together? And she said, maybe, but I can't commit to anything right now because of my circumstances. And you could tell he was really sad about it. Now on Twitter, I saw a lot of people trying to make a comparison between Tanya and Belinda, saying Belinda did the same thing that Tanya did to her, but I don't see it. And the reason why I don't is because in both situations, somebody brought a proposition to her. She didn't bring it to them. She didn't ask for an investor or a partner. Also, Tanya didn't have to worry about her potential safety. But Linda is trying to get gone and be invisible to Gary. And let's just say that we actually do start this business. What do you say when Porn Chai says, how did you get the capital for this business? You gonna tell him the truth or you gonna lie? The best thing you could probably do is not involve him at all. So then we get back to the photo op over there by the wellness center. And Rick is keeping a close eye on that security detail. They moving farther and farther away from him. And the longer Rick stared at Jim, his rage just kept increasing. So much to the point that he finally got up off that bench. And as he was walking in that direction, Chelsea popped up behind him and said, Rick, what are you about to do? And Rick said, get out of here. He told her that twice. She didn't listen. And so he kept walking toward them taking that group photo. And when he finally made it to him, he opened up Jim's jacket, took his own gun from him. And see, that's where Jim messed up because he showed his hand too early. My mama told me if you gonna show it to him, you gonna pull it, make sure you use it. And at that point, Jim didn't have any backup. Rick told Jim, F you, bruh, and let rounds loose in his chest. Side note, let me tell you, Lori is my girl because homegirl, as soon as she heard the rounds, she was way ahead of the other girls. She didn't do no pretty girl trot up out of there. She was booking it. I feel like she can do a good go route. So he pretty much takes down Jim, and then Shatala was like, why did you do that? And he said, because he killed my father. She was like, he is your father. He told me. And that's a terrible way to find out that's your dad. And this is why I said in my review for episode 7 that they knew who they were before they got to their house, because rich people have resources. You don't just let any old body in your house. They knew exactly who Rick was. This could have all been avoided, but I'm realizing that they are about the same person, because Rick should have let Jim talk when he was at his house so he could find out that that was his father under better conditions. But he decided he wanted to flip a chair. And so when Jim gets back to the hotel, he's mad about that chair flip. So he wants to trigger his son, talking about his dead mama, saying his dad isn't anything to miss out on. That's kind of tracking right now, though. But at no point in time did it cross your mind to just say, I'm your father, and kept it moving. But instead, you let your ego get in the way, and this is what the result of that is. I just knew that Rick's mom was going to tell him the right name on her deathbed. It's so funny that Rick never met his dad until yesterday, but they act pretty much the same with that hothead. Then security returned to get in a whole shootout with Rick, and Rick took both of them out. Unfortunately, Chelsea did not know how to take cover in a shootout, because one of the guys got her. And of course, Rick was like frantically trying to get her some help, but I was like, bro, it's too late. It looked like she literally got shot near her heart. Ain't no way she gonna survive that. And it's so ironic that she got shot so close to her heart because she had such a big heart for you. And you just couldn't get out of your own way. So it's safe to say that pain won the battle against hope. And I know some people are gonna say, well, this is totally Rick's fault. Well, a lot of it is. However, she is an adult. She can't infantilize this man talking about I can fix him. She made her choice. She said, amor fati. She said, I've already made my bed with my fate. Whatever happens to you, happens to me. Good or bad. And at least she was okay with that. A lot of people say stuff like, Rama, ride or die. And then you forget that some of y'all got to live out the die portion. And just like I said, when needed, Gaytak would jump into action. He ran over there like a RoboCop with that gun. And Shatala was like, go ahead and shoot him. He went that way. And he didn't really want to do it, but she really pushed him to that. It was still his choice, and he took 2 shots and killed Rick. The sad thing is, Chelsea said it comes in 3s. I got a bad feeling about this, but she didn't listen to herself. And it was sad to see her go, but it is what it is. So Rick and Chelsea died together. But you know who lived? Lachlan. This man survived by some miracle, and I'm trying to figure out why. Did he not drink enough of the poison? Did something that he had in the drink kind of cancel it out? I don't know. But either way, he woke up and told Tim, I think I saw God. And Tim was both relieved and just overjoyed that he survived. So then they're back on the boat heading to the airport. And the Rattlers are getting their phones back. So Tim decided he was going to finally get in front of it. So he got their attention and said some things are about to change, but we'll get through it as a family. And there's nothing more important than family. And he left it there. But when Saxon looked at his phone and then looked back up at his dad, he knew what he meant. And if you look at Tim's face at the end, you can see that he was a bit happier, because he had that weight lifted off of him because he wasn't holding that big secret anymore. And then he hearkened back to what the monk said at the beginning, where he said, we try to control so many things in our lives, and it's really temporary fixes. But once you start going with the flow and embracing that change, it makes things a lot easier. So now we're doing more of the wrap-up part of the episode where you show where people are at the end of the season. It was cool for the most part. Gary and Chloe were still trying to do that thing where they found a third to perform that fantasy that he wanted. Frank made it back to the monastery, so hopefully he's getting that balance back in order. Rick and Chelsea, of course, went home in body bags. Now, my final prediction, I didn't predict either one of these folks would go. That's partially because I felt like they would get it together. But in multiple reviews that I put out, I was like, I'm thinking there's going to be a number of bodies, but I just wasn't sure who it was going to be and how it was going to take place. In total, you had 5 different bodies. You had 2 security guards, Jim, and then Rick and Chelsea. And that was a lot for White Lotus. I'm just glad it wasn't the monkeys. Now, one thing I didn't like is the fact that Alexei, Vlad, and Valentin got to just be criminals. No consequences whatsoever. And the crazy thing is, Gaytak, who knew about the robbery, got the girl and got a promotion. Shatala was like, you got the juice now, G. And what also made me happy is that Zion and Belinda took a whole different boat back. And Belinda and Porn Chai exchanged looks. She was like, I'll miss you, Porn Chai. And he said, I'll miss you too, Belinda. And that was pretty much it. Overall, I think it was a great season. It had a whole lot of twists and turns. I think it was some twisted stuff that I didn't really want in there. And for the most part, it was very entertaining and it kept us on our toes. Mike did a great job of keeping those pump fakes going. So what did y'all think? Did y'all enjoy the episode? Did you enjoy the season in general? Did I miss anything? Feel free to drop a comment down below. Remember to like, subscribe if you want to, and hit that notification bell so you know when I drop new content. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.